The city was still waking when sunlight spilled across the glass towers of downtown Chicago. Somewhere on the 32nd floor, a coffee cup trembled in her hands. Steam curled upward, then faded into the cold office air. Have you ever reached a morning when your heart whispered enough Emma Collins had given 3 years to Harrison and Co., 3 years of deadlines, boardrooms, and polite smiles that never reached her eyes? Now. Her resignation letter rested beside that cooling cup, the ink still damp. Outside, the hum of traffic rose like a distant tide. Inside, her world felt unbearably still. The faint scent of burnt espresso mixed with the paper's clean edge. She could hear the copier down the hall, the soft ping of an elevator, ordinary sounds that suddenly felt final. Her reflection in the glass looked like someone she barely knew. Tired eyes, straight spine. A woman pretending she hadn't already broken. Somewhere behind another wall of glass, Liam Harrison. The man who made silence feel like pressure waited. He didn't know this morning would change everything. And she didn't know that walking into his office with a letter and a cup of coffee would be the moment that tore both their lives open just enough for something real to begin. And that's how it started, the story neither of them saw coming. The first light of October brushed against the glass towers, painting soft gold across the skyline of Chicago. The city was stirring horns, footsteps, the hiss of espresso machines on the corner cafes. But on the 32nd floor of Harrison and Co., time felt suspended. Emma Collins sat at her desk, staring at the reflection of sunlight trembling on her half-empty mug. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she kept holding it, as if warmth might somehow return through sheer will. The letter beside it, a single sheet of white paper folded in half, seemed to pulse with every heartbeat she tried to steady. There comes a morning, she thought, when even the strongest heart whispers enough. Her office was neat, almost sterile. A framed award from last year gleamed beside a wilting fern she kept forgetting to water. 3 years as marketing director had turned her world into a rhythm of late nights and early flights. Strategy decks and rehearsed smiles. Success, they called it. Burnout. Her mirror called it back. She rubbed the spot between her eyebrows where the tension always settled. On the window, her reflection looked distant, tired eyes, hair too polished to feel like her own. Somewhere below, the street shimmered with people rushing to jobs that probably looked like purpose. Emma had once believed in that too. Her phone buzzed, a reminder, meeting with CEO 900 A.M. The name on the screen, Liam Harrison, brought a familiar tightening in her chest. She couldn't recall the last real conversation they'd had that wasn't about numbers or deadlines. He was brilliant, everyone said, a man who spoke little but whose silence filled entire rooms. A man who had built this empire from his father's shadow and carried its weight like armor. She used to admire him. Now she mostly feared the way his voice could flatten an entire day. She stood, straightening the hem of her blazer. The movement was automatic, ritualistic, another armor. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she walked to the window. From up here, the lake shimmered faintly in the distance, the kind of blue that promised peace. If she could only reach it, a knock on the door. "Emma," said a voice gentle, uncertain. Mia, her junior associate, held a stack of folders to her chest. "The pitch deck's ready, Mr. Harrison said he might want the updated figures today." Emma smiled faintly, taking the folders. "Thank you, Mia. Leave them here." Mia hesitated, then whispered, "You okay? You look tired," Emma offered. Mia nodded. "Yeah, just take care." "Okay." When the door closed, Emma traced her thumb along the edge of the resignation letter. The paper felt heavier than it should. She had rewritten it 5 times over the weekend. Every version sounded too cold or too emotional. The final one simply said the truth. "It's time for me to move on." Her watch read 8:52. She gathered her things, a notebook, the letter, her courage. Before leaving, she paused by her desk and looked once more at the framed photo tucked in the corner. It showed her team at last year's campaign launch. Everyone smiling. Liam stood at the center, distant yet somehow magnetic. She remembered that night the champagne, the laughter, the way he had quietly thanked her when no one was listening. "You make this place better," he'd said. She had held on to those words longer than she should have. Now, even remembering them felt like touching a bruise. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was silent, except for the soft hum of cables. Her reflection in the mirrored wall looked composed, but her hands trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on the coffee cup she'd carried out of habit. Not thirst. The lid was loose. A faint warmth seeped through, tracing a small circle in her palm. The door slid open with a muted chime. The reception area smelled of polished wood and new leather. Assistants moved quietly, their footsteps muffled on the carpet. Emma nodded to one of them and walked down the corridor lined with frosted glass. Behind one of those walls, Liam Harrison waited calm, unreadable. Every step echoed the same thought. It's time. She stopped outside his office. The double-glass doors reflected her like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Through the glass, she could see him standing by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, his presence filled the room. Emma took a breath deep enough to hurt. Inside, his voice was low, clipped. "Delay the meeting with the board. I'll handle it after 9. He ended the call, turning toward her. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The silence stretched, fragile and sharp. "Emma," he said finally. His tone was polite, almost gentle but distant, like he was addressing a problem, not a person. "You wanted to see me." She stepped closer, placing the coffee on his desk, beside a stack of reports. "Yes." Her voice surprised her, steady, even warm. "I won't take much of your time." His eyes flicked to the letter in her hand. "Is that what I think it is?" She nodded, the motion small but certain. "My resignation." The word hung in the air like a dropped glass, waiting to shatter. For a long moment, Liam said nothing. Only the faint ticking of the clock on the wall filled the space between them. Emma could feel her pulse in her throat, could hear the whisper of wind outside brushing against the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I see." He reached for the letter, but she didn't let go immediately. Their fingers brushed the contact brief, electric, gone too soon. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, disappointment. It was gone before she could name it. "I appreciate everything you've done," he said. "But may I ask why now?" Emma exhaled, the truth pressing against her ribs. "Because I'm tired of fighting to matter." The honesty startled even her. She saw a muscle tighten in his jaw, but he said nothing, just a small nod, the kind that meant he'd heard her but wouldn't feel it. "I understand," he murmured finally, eyes unreadable. "No," she thought, "you don't." Her throat burned with words she swallowed, about the nights she stayed late while others went home, about how he never once asked if she was okay, about how every achievement felt invisible under his cold praise. But she said none of it, not yet. Instead, she lifted her chin. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said quietly. Liam's gaze softened barely. "Emma," he began, then stopped, as if the rest of the sentence refused to form. She waited, but the silence returned, thicker now. When she turned to leave, the faintest tremor passed through her hand. The coffee cup tilted slightly, leaving a ring of dark brown on the edge of his pristine desk. She caught it before it spilled, heart thudding. For some reason, he smiled, a quiet, knowing curve of the lips that only deepened her confusion. Emma stepped back, clutching the cup like a shield. "Goodbye, Mr. Harrison." As she walked toward the elevator, The sound of her heels faded into the hum of the city below. Behind her, sunlight poured through the window, striking the coffee stain she'd left behind small, imperfect, impossible to ignore. Somewhere deep down, something told her this wasn't the end. It was the moment everything began to move. The elevator doors slid shut behind her with a low hum. For a moment, Emma could see her own reflection layered over the rising floors, a ghost of herself carried upward through glass and steel. The cup in her hand had cooled completely. Her fingers still trembled around it, though she tried to hide it by gripping tighter. She told herself to breathe, to walk in, to speak clearly, to be professional. One last time. The 34th floor opened into light white, spotless, and almost painfully still. His floor. The air carried the faint scent of cologne and paper, a kind of cold elegance that made her spine straighten without thinking. The receptionist gave a polite nod. "He's expecting you, Ms. Collins." She stepped forward, heels soft against the carpet. Through the glass wall at the end of the corridor, Liam Harrison stood with his back to her, facing the skyline. The city stretched behind him like a painting. The morning sun caught the edges of his reflection, splitting his image in two, the man and the ghost of him, both equally distant. Emma paused at the door, knocked once. "Come in." His voice low, calm, rolled through the room. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. The kind of voice that made silence feel like pressure. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Liam turned, no jacket, crisp white shirt, sleeves folded neatly to his forearms. A silver watch glinted on his wrist, precise as the man himself. His expression gave away nothing. He simply looked at her, waiting. "Morning," she said quietly. "Emma," he acknowledged, as if her name were part of a schedule. "Sit down." She didn't. The chair in front of his desk felt like a trap. Instead, she set the coffee cup on the edge of the polished surface, next to his laptop. It left a faint ring of moisture she didn't bother wiping away. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space. "You wanted to see me," Liam said, closing the file in his hand. "Is there a problem with the campaign report?" She shook her head. Not with the report. Her voice felt foreign in her own throat. "With me?" He raised a brow slightly. "Go on." Emma drew in a breath that shivered halfway through. "I'm resigning." The words seemed to land softly, too softly. Liam didn't flinch. He just looked at her, steady and unreadable. "May I ask why?" "You may," she said, meeting his eyes. "But I don't think you'll understand." His jaw tensed, a flicker of irritation beneath the calm. "Try me." Emma's pulse quickened. Every instinct told her to stay composed, to keep it professional, but the calm in his voice, the detachment struck something raw. "For 3 years," she began, "I've done everything this job demanded. Late nights, missed birthdays, rewriting proposals until dawn. I gave you results. I gave this company everything." He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. And in return, she almost laughed. The sound came out brittle. "In return, I got silence, the kind that makes you question if you even exist." He didn't respond right away, just watched her. His gaze wasn't cruel, just impossibly steady. It made her feel exposed, as if every word she spoke was being weighed, measured, judged. "Emma," he said at last, "you know this company values you." She shook her head slowly. "No, Liam. It uses me." The air between them thickened. A faint tremor of tension buzzed against the sterile quiet. Outside the window, sunlight shifted, reflecting against the glass until the room shimmered with pale gold. He spoke again, softer this time. "You're making a mistake." Her heart stuttered. The words were simple, but the tone controlled. Absolute hit, like a verdict. Something in her broke then, a small, sharp sound inside that no one else could hear. "Maybe I am," she whispered. but at least it'll be my mistake. She reached into her bag, pulling out the folded letter. Her hand didn't shake this time. She placed it on his desk, beside the untouched coffee. Liam's eyes flicked to it, then back to her. For a moment, his expression shifted something unreadable, almost human, but then it was gone, smoothed over by professionalism. He stood, tall and composed, walking around the desk until he was only a few feet away. Emma could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the crease near his temple that only appeared when he was tired. 3 years, he said quietly, almost to himself. You think I didn't notice? She blinked, startled. Notice what? The hours you stayed, the nights you sent drafts at 2 the way the team looks to you before they look to me. His voice stayed even, but there was something beneath it, something like frustration or restraint. I noticed. Emma. Her throat tightened. Then why did it always feel like I was invisible? He hesitated. Just long enough to make her wonder if the question hit deeper than he expected. Then, because you never looked back. The words landed somewhere between a truth and a wound. Emma's breath caught. She opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of a phone buzzing on his desk cut through the silence. He glanced at the screen, declined the call, then looked at her again. Is there anything I can say to change your mind? She thought about it, the years, the exhaustion, the nights she cried in her car after another meeting where her ideas were dismissed only to be praised when he repeated them. The answer came easily. No. He nodded once, slowly, as if memorizing the moment. Then, I wish you luck. It should have felt like closure. It didn't. She turned to leave, but something made her pause at the door. The glass wall reflected them both, her small, tense figure and his still, sharp silhouette framed by the city beyond. Two people separated not by distance, but by everything unsaid. Emma looked down at her hand. The faint tremor had returned. She whispered, almost to herself, You were right about one thing. Liam looked up. What's that? Silence does say a lot. She didn't wait for a reply. She opened the door, letting the cold air of the hallway brush against her skin. Her heart pounded as she walked away, heels soft against the carpet, every step both heavy and freeing. Behind her, Liam stood still for a long moment, staring at the letter on his desk. The coffee beside it had left a small brown ring, imperfect, unpolished. His hand hovered above it, then dropped to his side. The city outside gleamed. Indifferent. He exhaled, a sound almost like a sigh. You're not invisible. Emma. He murmured to the empty room, but she was already gone. And in the quiet that followed, even the ticking clock seemed to wait for what would happen next. The door had almost closed when his voice cut through the still air. Low, calm, final. You're making a mistake. Emma stopped. The words slid into her spine like cold metal. She turned back, her hand still on the door handle. He was standing behind his desk, sleeves rolled, expression steady. The morning light caught the edge of his shirt, the white fabric glowing faintly against the shadowed room. A mistake. That's what she was to him. A line item misplaced. A decision to be corrected. The word pulsed in her head, echoing over every night she'd stayed late. Every idea he'd taken without a word of credit. Every silence he'd offered in return for her loyalty. She let go of the handle. Slowly. She walked back toward him. Excuse me. Her voice came out quiet but sharp. A mistake. Liam didn't flinch. Yes. You're too good at what you do to throw it away because of... He hesitated. Whatever this is. Emma laughed softly. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that trembled with everything held in too long. Whatever this is, you mean exhaustion, or maybe the feeling that I could vanish tomorrow and no one here would notice. He crossed his arms. That's not true. Isn't it? She stepped closer, her heels barely making a sound on the carpet. You never asked how I was doing, Liam, not once. You just handed me another deadline, Another impossible goal, and expected me to smile through it. "You're being emotional," he said quietly. That did it. Emma felt something snap, the way a glass cracks before it shatters. Her pulse raced. "Of course I'm emotional," she burst out. "I've given 3 years to this place. 3 years of my life, my weekends, my sleep while you stood there acting like I was lucky to breathe the same air as your empire." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "You think silence is strength, but it's not. It's cowardice. It's control. You freeze people out so they won't see you care." For the first time, he looked caught off guard, just slightly. His brows drew together. "You don't understand me?" "No," she said, voice breaking. "You never gave anyone the chance to—" The words hung there, raw and electric. The room felt too bright, too still. She could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the hum of the air vent, her own ragged breathing. Liam's tone dropped, quiet and clipped. "I'm not the villain you're painting me as." Emma shook her head. "Then stop acting like one." She didn't mean to step closer, but her anger moved her feet before her mind could catch up. The coffee cup, still half full, sat at the edge of his desk. She reached for it, mostly to have something to do with her shaking hands. The lid wasn't tight. It slipped. A dark streak of liquid splashed across his shirt. For a split second, neither of them moved. The sound, the soft thud of the cup hitting the desk, the faint drip of coffee onto the floor seemed deafening. "Oh my God!" Emma froze. "I didn't." Liam looked down at his shirt, then back at her. The rich brown stain spread slowly across the white cotton, bleeding into the fabric. The contrast was striking, too perfect, too irreversible. She expected him to shout, to fire her on the spot, to finally show the anger she had braced for all these years. But he didn't. He just stood there, silent, watching her. The quiet pressed in, thick and unbearable. The only sound was her own breathing, quick, uneven, and the faint drip of coffee hitting the carpet one drop at a time. She stepped back, her chest tightening. "I'm sorry. I don't." His voice was soft, almost gentle. Her eyes darted to his, searching for anger, for something she could understand. But what she saw there was something else. Not rage, not surprise, something deeper. He ran a thumb across the stain, then looked up, his mouth curving slightly. Not a smirk, not exactly a smile. Just something strange, tired, almost tender. "You always did know how to make an impression," he said quietly. Emma blinked. "Are you serious right now? Completely?" Her confusion deepened. The room felt suddenly smaller, warmer, as if the air itself had changed. Her pulse wouldn't slow. "This isn't funny," she whispered. "I'm not laughing," he replied. His voice had dropped. Rougher now. "But maybe you should stop assuming every battle has to end in blood." She didn't know what to say to that. The anger that had carried her this far began to fade, leaving behind something hollow and heavy. Regret slipped in like a shadow. The sight of the stain on his shirt made her stomach twist. She turned away, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I need to leave." Liam didn't stop her. He didn't move at all. As she reached the door, her fingers brushed the handle again. Her reflection in the glass looked pale, shaken, small. She hated it, the fragility, the guilt creeping in. Behind her, his voice came again, quieter than before. "Emma." She stopped but didn't turn. "For what it's worth," he said. "You're not wrong." The words caught her mid-breath. He continued, slower now, as if choosing each word carefully. "About the silence, about me." The air shifted again, heavy with something unspoken. Emma turned slightly, just enough to see him through the glass. The man who always seemed untouchable now stood there with coffee dripping down his sleeve, sunlight cutting across his face. Somehow, he looked human. Neither spoke for a long moment. The city moved outside the windows, cars, clouds, people living their small, ordinary lives. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. Emma finally whispered, "Goodbye." "Liam." She walked out before she could lose her nerve. The door closed softly behind her. Liam stayed still, eyes fixed on the dark stains spreading across his shirt. Then, without warning, he laughed a quiet, strange sound that didn't reach his eyes. He touched the fabric again, the warmth already fading, and then, with a faint smile that no one saw, he whispered to the empty room, "Maybe mistakes are the only things that make us real." Outside, the elevator chimed. Somewhere between anger and understanding, something had shifted. The coffee still dripped onto the floor, one slow drop at a time. The room still smelled of coffee. A faint bitterness lingered in the air, clinging to the silence that followed. Emma could hear her own pulse, loud against the quiet. Liam hadn't moved. He stood behind his desk, coffee staining his shirt, gaze steady as if the chaos had never happened. The world outside kept moving cars below, sunlight glinting off glass, but inside, everything held still. Emma wanted to leave, but her feet wouldn't obey. Her hand was still on the door, fingers trembling slightly. He was the first to move, slowly, without a word. Liam walked back to his desk. The faint sound of his shoes against the floor felt deafening. He set the empty cup upright, wiped the spill with a folded napkin, then opened the top drawer of his desk. The soft click of the drawer made Emma flinch. Her voice cracked. "If you're about to fire me, don't bother. I already quit." He didn't look up. "I'm not going to fire you." His tone was even, too even, "but I do need to show you something." She frowned. "Liam, I don't." He lifted his gaze then, and in his hand, a small velvet box. Navy blue, square, simple. Emma froze, her first thought ridiculous. Fleeting was that it must be for someone else. A client gift, a prototype, anything but what it looked like. But Liam's voice cut through that thought, low and deliberate. "That coffee," he said, "just landed on the man who was about to propose to you." The words didn't register right away. They floated between them. Impossible. Absurd. Then they sank in. Emma blinked, once, twice. "I'm sorry." What Liam exhaled softly, not in frustration, more like surrender. "I had planned to tell you today." After the meeting, he gestured toward the letter still on the desk, edges curled from her grip. "But you walked in with that." Emma's breath caught. "This is insane. You can't." She shook her head, trying to laugh it off. "This is not funny. Liam, it's not a joke. Then it's cruel." Her voice cracked. "You picked this moment after everything. After I just..." She gestured to the stain spreading across his shirt, to the silence that had swallowed them whole. Liam didn't interrupt. He let her words crash into the stillness. Only the faint tick of the wall clock filled the gap. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost fragile. "You think I didn't see you breaking? I did. I just didn't know how to reach you without making it worse." Emma laughed, a short, shaky sound. "You don't reach people by freezing them out." "I know." His tone shifted, a hint of regret threading through. "I thought giving you space was respect. I thought silence meant control. It turns out, it only made me a stranger to you." He opened the box. Inside, a simple gold ring glimmered under the white office light. No diamonds, no grand gesture, just quiet intention. Emma stared at it as if it might disappear if she blinked. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious." "Liam," her voice faltered, "you don't even know who I am anymore." "I know enough," he said softly. "I know you make this place breathe. I know you care more than anyone else here. And I know that every time you walked into a room, I had to pretend it didn't matter." The confession hung between them like a thread stretched too tight. Emma stepped back, one hand pressed to her chest. Her heart felt too big for her ribs. You can't just say that after years of acting like I didn't exist." His gaze didn't waver. Maybe I acted that way because you mattered too much. She swallowed hard, eyes glistening. Don't, what? Don't rewrite the story now that it's ending. Liam took a slow step forward, careful, like he was approaching a wounded bird. Maybe it's not ending. Emma's throat tightened. You're out of your mind. He almost smiled. Possibly. She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. You can't drop something like this on me. Not now. Not like this. You think a ring fixes everything? No, he said quietly, but maybe it starts something. Silence fell again, heavy, measured. Emma could hear the faint buzz of city life beyond the glass. But here, time had stopped. Her hands trembled as she looked at him. This man she had admired, hated, defended, resented. The man who built walls of glass around himself and then wondered why no one came close. The sight of him standing there, coffee-stained, holding a ring that didn't belong to the moment, it was too much. She turned away, her voice barely more than a whisper. You don't get to decide when I'm ready to feel something again. I'm not deciding anything, he replied. I'm just telling you the truth. She hesitated, fingers brushing the edge of the door. And what truth is that? Liam's answer came softly, without pause. That I love you, and I'm probably terrible at it. The words landed like a quiet blow. There was no drama in his tone, no plea, just an admission, bare and unguarded. Emma's breath hitched. For a moment, she said nothing. The ring in his hand gleamed faintly under the morning sun. Then, slowly, she whispered, You picked the wrong moment. He nodded once, almost sadly. Maybe, but it's the only one I had left. Her eyes met his. For a second, she saw the man beneath the armor, the one who didn't know how to speak the language of softness until it was too late. Something inside her cracked open. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the sharp edge of anger dulled just enough to hurt differently. She stepped back, her voice low. I need to leave. Emma, don't, she said, turning the handle. Please, don't follow me. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman caught between fury and disbelief. She looked at herself and almost didn't recognize the person staring back. Behind her, Liam didn't move. The ring still glinted faintly in his hand. She opened the door, stepping into the cold corridor. Her pulse raced. Her breath came in shallow waves. As she walked away, her thoughts tangled. Was it a confession? A manipulation? A moment of madness? She didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't breathe inside that room anymore. By the time the elevator doors closed, her hands were shaking. Somewhere deep inside, a single question burned like an ember she couldn't put out. Was she running from him, or from the part of herself that still wanted to believe him and far above, behind those glass walls? Liam Harrison stood alone, watching the door she had just closed. The faint scent of coffee still in the air, bittersweet and impossible to forget. Rain had started by the time Emma reached the street, not the wild kind, just a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the city into watercolor. She walked without an umbrella, her coat clinging to her shoulders, her thoughts louder than the traffic. Each step sounded like a question she didn't know how to answer. She replayed his words again and again. That coffee just landed on the man who was about to propose to you. They didn't make sense. They couldn't. It had to be shock, guilt, or some cruel attempt to soften her exit. And yet, the way he'd said it, calm, sincere, almost sad. By the time she reached her apartment, her hands were trembling. She tossed her keys onto the counter and stood still, listening to the rain against the window. The quiet pressed in, thick and heavy. For the first time in months, she had nowhere to be, no emails waiting, no one to prove herself to. She thought that would feel freeing. Instead, it felt like falling. Emma sat on the couch, her hair damp, clothes wrinkled. The city lights shimmered through the rain outside, tiny constellations caught in motion. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and whispered, "What just happened?" The room gave no answer, only the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of pipes, life, continuing as if hers hadn't just cracked open. She thought about the box in his hand, the gold ring, the look on his face, and then against her will, other memories came flooding back. 3 years of working under Liam Harrison. 3 years of late nights and glass-walled meetings where ambition met exhaustion. He'd always been composed, almost too much so. The kind of man whose silence filled every space, whose approval you learned not to expect. But now, in hindsight, she remembered the smaller things, the ones she had missed. The meeting 2 winters ago, when the board tried to cut her team's budget. She'd fought back, her voice shaking, and when she thought she'd lost, Liam had stepped in. "Colin's department stays intact," he'd said, voice cold but final. She'd assumed it was for the company's benefit. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Then there was the client dinner, where she spilled red wine on her notes. She'd excused herself to cry quietly in the restroom, and when she returned, her mess of data had been reprinted, reorganized, waiting neatly at her place. She never asked who had done it, but she remembered seeing Liam's pen beside the papers. She had brushed it off then. She always brushed it off, because caring from him didn't fit the story she'd built about who he was. Her chest ached with the thought. She stood and walked to the window. The rain was heavier now, streaking the glass like tears she refused to shed. "What if the walls I built to survive," she whispered, "kept out what I needed most?" The words came unbidden, fragile but real. She hated them instantly, hated the truth hiding underneath. Emma had learned long ago that survival required distance. Keep control, stay focused, never depend on anyone who could disappoint you. Liam had been the embodiment of that danger, powerful, unreadable, too capable of hurting her without even trying. She hadn't hated him. Not really. She'd been afraid of him, afraid of the way her pulse changed when he looked at her, afraid of wanting something from him she could never ask for. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cool glass. The city below was a blur of color and motion, people moving through puddles and traffic lights like tiny stories of their own. She wondered how many of them were walking away from something that might have saved them. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Mia. "You okay? Heard you left early. Want to talk?" Emma typed, "I'm fine," then deleted it. She tried again. Not yet. Maybe later. Sent. The words "not yet" lingered on the screen long after the message was gone. They felt truer than anything she'd said all day. She turned on the lamp beside her couch. Warm light pooled across the floor, softening the edges of the room. Her coffee mug from that morning still sat on the counter, the surface dark and still. She picked it up, tracing her finger around the rim, remembering how the steam had felt against her lips before everything unraveled. A flash of memory, Liam's voice, low and steady. "Maybe it's not ending." She had hated how calm he'd sounded, how sure. She set the mug down too hard. The sound echoed through the small apartment. "Why can't I just be done with this?" she muttered. No answer, of course, only the soft percussion of rain. She walked to her bedroom, shed her wet clothes, and wrapped herself in a blanket. The weight of it grounded her, barely, but her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face the way he'd looked at her after she threw the coffee. Not with anger, but something else. Something that frightened her more than fury ever could. Care. She turned on her side, pressing her palms to her face. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "Stop." But she couldn't stop remembering. The way he had stood during her first presentation, arms crossed, silent, but the only one who stayed after everyone left to tell her. You held your ground. The way he'd once brought her a cup of tea during a long night, setting it beside her without a word. The way his voice softened, just a fraction. When he said her name, it was all there, buried under years of pride and miscommunication. She had chosen to ignore it because it was safer that way. And now, it was too late. Or maybe not. She didn't know anymore. Her breath slowed. The rain outside had become steady, rhythmic, almost comforting. She let herself listen to the sound of water, to her own heartbeat, to the quiet realization that anger wasn't the only thing left in her. There was something else now, something unfamiliar. She wasn't sure if it was longing or fear. Maybe both. The storm inside her wasn't loud. It didn't rage. It whispered. It pulled her backward, toward everything she had tried to leave behind. In the half-dark, her eyes found the faint reflection of herself in the window, a woman caught between what she believed and what she felt. A woman learning that running away and being free weren't always the same thing. She exhaled softly, almost like a prayer. What if I got him wrong? The city answered with nothing but rain. And somewhere across town, in a high-rise office that still smelled faintly of coffee, Liam Harrison sat alone under the same storm, staring at a velvet box on his desk, open, empty, waiting. The rain hadn't stopped. It fell in soft, steady sheets, turning the city into a blur of gray and gold. Streetlights shimmered against puddles, and every passing car drew a pale ribbon of light across the wet asphalt. Emma sat by the window, her knees pulled close, a blanket draped around her shoulders. The city outside looked softer than usual, almost forgiving. She watched a single drop slide down the glass, tracing its way to the edge before disappearing. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of the rain. It had been her only companion all evening. Then came the knock, soft, hesitant, 3 times. At first, she thought she imagined it, but then it came again slightly louder, cutting through the rhythm of the rain. She rose slowly, tightening the blanket around her. No one came here unannounced. Not this late. She hesitated before opening the door, and when she did, Liam stood there, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead, shirt clinging to him, water dripping onto the hallway floor. And there it was, the faint brown stain across the front of his white shirt. The one she'd left. Liam. Her voice was barely a whisper. He met her eyes, his expression unreadable, though softer than she remembered. I didn't know where else to go. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them buzzed with the kind of silence that had once been their language. Then Emma stepped aside, wordlessly letting him in. He entered quietly, leaving a faint trail of rainwater behind him. The apartment felt smaller with him there. He looked around as if unsure where to begin. She closed the door, the click sounding final. You shouldn't be here. Probably not, he said. His voice was low, rough from the cold. But I had to see you. Emma crossed her arms. You think showing up like this makes any of it better? He shook his head. No, I just couldn't let it end with that coffee. She almost laughed, tired, bitter. You mean the one I threw at you? His lips curved, faintly. That's the one. A drop of water slid down from his hair, landing on the floor between them. The sound was small, almost tender. Emma sighed, turning away. You should get out of those clothes before you catch pneumonia. He hesitated, then removed his soaked jacket, hanging it over the back of a chair. The shirt clung to his chest, translucent under the light. The stain had faded, but it was still there like something stubborn that refused to wash away. She handed him a towel without meeting his eyes. Here. Thanks. His hand brushed hers when he took it. The contact was brief, but it sent a flicker of warmth through her that she immediately hated herself for feeling. He dried his face, then said quietly, I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. Good, she said sharply, because I don't have any to give. Liam nodded, accepting it. He glanced toward the window, rain streaking the glass. I didn't come to talk about the company, either. Then why? He looked back at her. Steady now? Because I can't pretend you leaving doesn't matter. Her breath caught. You don't get to say that. I know. His voice softened. but I'm saying it anyway." The quiet stretched again, filled only by the sound of rain and her heartbeat. Emma wrapped the blanket tighter around her. "You said you were going to propose. Was that true?" He nodded once. "It was—" She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable. I didn't plan it that way." He said, "I had the ring for weeks. I was waiting for the right moment. But with us," he stopped, searching for words. "There never was a right moment, was there?" Her voice came out quieter now. "No. There wasn't." Liam moved closer, just a few feet away. "I wasn't good at showing it. Emma, I thought staying composed meant staying strong. I thought if I kept everything in control, nothing could fall apart." He paused. "But I lost you in the process." She stared at the floor. The rain outside drummed harder against the window, matching the rhythm in her chest. "You can't just say that and expect me to forget how it felt." "I don't expect that." He stepped closer. "I just need you to know it mattered. You mattered. Not just for the work you did or the company you helped build. You—" The way he said it, quiet, without demand, made her throat tighten. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Why now?" "Because I didn't understand until you walked away," he said. "I didn't realize how loud the silence would be without you in it." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. They hurt because they were gentle. "Because they were late," she whispered. "You think this changes anything?" He shook his head. "No, I just needed you to hear it." She turned to the window. The city lights blurred into gold streaks. "I don't know what you want me to say." "Nothing," he replied. "You don't owe me a thing." She let out a slow breath. The blanket slipped off her shoulders, pooling at her feet. "Then why are you still here?" Liam hesitated, because leaving felt worse. It was a simple answer. Honest, dangerous. The room grew still again. She could hear the rain, the ticking of the clock, the sound of her own pulse. He looked at her. Really looked, and in that gaze, there was no power, no title, no command, just a man standing in the mess of his own vulnerability. Something inside her softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. She walked to the kitchen, filled 2 mugs with hot water, dropped tea bags in each. The steam rose between them like a truce. Neither of them spoke aloud. She handed him one. "Here." "To keep you from freezing." He took it. Their fingers brushed again. The warmth from the cup seeped into his palms. And for a brief second, everything else, the storm, the pain, the confusion, faded into something still. They stood side by side, watching the rain. The city outside was a blur of lights and movement. Inside, time slowed. After a long while, Emma said softly, "I don't know where this goes." "Liam, I don't either," he admitted, "but I don't want to go back to before." Her eyes stayed on the window. "Maybe we can't." He nodded, voice quiet. "Maybe not." The tea steamed between them, carrying the scent of jasmine and warmth. The clock ticked softly in the background. For a moment, they simply breathed the same air. 2 people who had run out of ways to hurt each other, standing in the fragile peace that follows a storm. Then Emma spoke, barely above a whisper. "You should go before the rain stops." Liam looked at her, wanting to argue but knowing she was right. He set the mug down gently, the faint ring of heat marking the wood. He moved to the door, hesitated, and said, "For what it's worth, I'm not sorry I came." She didn't answer, just stood there, eyes lowered, heart unsteady. The door closed softly behind him. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the city clean. Inside, Emma stood in the stillness, the faint scent of tea and rain lingering in the air, along with something else. Something that felt like the beginning of forgiveness, or maybe just the end of loneliness. The morning after, the rain was gone. What it left behind was quieter pavement still glistening, sky pale and clean, the scent of damp earth clinging to the air. Emma woke late. For once, she didn't rush anywhere. She just sat by the window, a mug of coffee cooling in her hands, eyes tracing the sunlight that filtered through the blinds. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there in the rain, hair wet, shirt stained, eyes unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. He hadn't asked her to forgive him. He hadn't tried to explain away the past. He had just shown up. And somehow, that felt heavier than any apology could. She took a slow sip, the bitter warmth grounding her. On the table, her phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. I left your umbrella on the doorknob. You'll need it more than I will. L. Emma stared at the screen, a smile flickering before she could stop it. He remembered. She'd once complained that he never noticed small things, that he lived only in schedules and reports. And now here he was, leaving umbrellas in the rain. She opened the door. It was there, her old umbrella, navy blue, still wet at the edges. A tiny gesture, but something inside her softened. She brought it in, set it by the window, and just looked at it for a long time. The day passed slowly. By late afternoon, the sun had broken through, scattering gold across the city. She found herself walking, without really deciding where to go, until she was standing across the street from the coffee shop near Harrison & Co., the same one she used to stop by every morning before work. And there he was. Liam sat by the window, a cup of black coffee in front of him, shirt crisp, sleeves rolled, but this time no armor in his posture, just a quiet stillness. He noticed her almost immediately. Their eyes met through the glass, for a heartbeat. She considered turning away, but he gave a small nod, a silent invitation, and she walked in. The door chimed softly. The smell of roasted beans and sugar filled the air. He stood when she approached, as if unsure whether to offer a handshake or a memory. "Hi," she said. "Hi." His voice was softer than she remembered. "I didn't expect I was just walking," she interrupted. "Didn't plan on running into you?" He nodded, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "Then maybe we should take the coincidence as a sign." She hesitated, then sat. The silence between them wasn't sharp this time. It had texture, depth, the quiet kind that held space instead of walls. After a moment, she asked, "Why did you come last night?" He stared at his coffee, swirling it once before answering. "Because I needed you to see me. The real me." Emma tilted her head slightly. "And who is that?" He looked up, eyes darker than the coffee in his cup. Someone who doesn't know how to ask for help. The confession surprised her. He wasn't a man who used words like that. She stayed quiet, letting him speak. "My father built Harrison & Co. from nothing," he said. "When he died, I was 26. Everyone expected me to take over. So I did. But I didn't know what I was doing. I was scared out of my mind. Emma. I thought if I just controlled everything, if I stayed perfect, then I wouldn't lose anything else." The words came slowly, like stones he'd been carrying for years. "I lost my mother before that. A car accident. It was just the two of us afterward, my dad and me. He taught me to fight for every inch, to never show weakness. And when he was gone, that became the only thing I knew how to do." Emma's fingers tightened around her mug. The sound of the coffee machine hissed softly in the background. He continued, voice quieter now. "When you came in, you didn't just work, you changed things. You made people talk again. You made the place feel alive. And I didn't know what to do with that. I was supposed to lead, but you made me feel human again, and I didn't know how to handle it." The confession hit her somewhere deep. All those meetings, all the cold silences, it wasn't indifference. It was fear, the same kind she'd carried in her own way. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "You could have told me." "I know," he said, "but I didn't trust myself not to ruin it." Her gaze drifted toward the window. The sunlight was soft now, the kind that warmed without burning. "You built walls to survive," she murmured. "I built mine too." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why we understood each other more than we realized." For a while, they just sat there. No accusations, no defenses, just two people sitting in the soft quiet of what might be the beginning of understanding. Emma broke the silence first. "You still wear that shirt?" He glanced down, smiled when he saw the faint stain near the cuff. "I tried to clean it. It wouldn't come out." "Maybe it's a reminder," she said, lips curving slightly. "That control has its limits." He chuckled softly. "Maybe." The moment lingered between them, light, almost fragile. She realized then that for the first time in years, she wasn't angry when she looked at him. There was something gentler, something that felt like peace waiting to happen. When she finally stood to leave, Liam rose too. "Emma," he said, voice steady but quiet, "I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know the truth." She met his eyes. And for once, there was no battle there, only recognition. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded, and she turned to go. Outside, the sun was dipping behind the skyline, spilling soft orange light over the wet pavement. As she stepped into the glow, she realized that understanding didn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes, it just came with light. Behind her, through the glass. Liam watched as she walked away, his reflection fading into hers for a moment, before the sunlight swallowed them both. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't on opposite sides of the glass anymore. Not entirely. It began quietly. A coffee after work that turned into a walk along the river. A walk that turned into dinner. Then long drives through the city with no destination. Only conversation. No grand gestures. No declarations, just two people who had spent too long talking to everyone except each other. At first, Emma told herself it was closure, that she was only trying to understand the man who had once made her doubt everything about herself. But understanding has a way of softening edges, and soon, the distance between them began to dissolve. Liam was different outside the office, still composed, still deliberate, but there was a gentleness in the way he listened now. He talked about his father's stubbornness, about the early days of the company when failure had been a constant shadow. Sometimes, his stories trailed off into silence, and Emma filled the space with laughter, small, unguarded, the kind that surprised them both. It was easy, almost too easy, to forget who they were from 9 to 5. Then came the looks, the whispers. By the second week, the company seemed to hum with quiet speculation. Eyes followed her through the glass hallways. Conversations paused when she entered the elevator. Someone had seen them leaving the coffee shop together. Someone else had noticed his hand brushing hers in the lobby. "Guess that's how you get promoted," one of the marketing assistants murmured, just loud enough for others to hear. The laughter that followed was sharp, rehearsed. Emma tried to ignore it, but the words clung. The air in the office felt heavier, the smiles more brittle. Meetings became minefields. Every time Liam spoke to her, she could feel the shift, the room tightening, glances exchanging like invisible wires pulling her apart. One afternoon, she caught two women in the break room whispering as she passed. "She's probably sleeping her way to the board," one of them said. The other snickered. Emma stopped in the hallway, her hands trembling. She wanted to walk back and confront them, but what could she say? That they were wrong? That this, whatever this was, wasn't what they thought? Even she didn't have the words for it. That night, she stayed late, long after everyone else had gone. The building was quiet, washed in the blue glow of city lights. Liam found her still at her desk, staring at a blank document. "Emma," he said softly, stepping inside, "you should go home." She didn't look up. "Maybe I should." He came closer. "What's going on?" Her laugh was bitter. "You really don't know. I'm guessing it's about us," he said. She finally met his gaze. "There is no us. Not in the way they think, Not in the way I can explain. Liam's jaw tightened. People will talk no matter what. They're not just talking, Liam. They're dismantling everything I worked for. Her voice trembled, the anger beneath it raw. Do you have any idea what it's like to walk into a room and know every woman in it thinks you slept your way there? He was silent. The truth in her words hung heavy between them. I didn't ask for this, she said quietly. I didn't ask for you to show up at my door or tell me things I don't know how to carry. He took a slow breath. Do you regret it? Her eyes met his. I don't know yet. The honesty stung. For both of them. He turned away, leaning against the edge of her desk. You shouldn't have to choose between your career and how you feel. She almost laughed. That's easy for you to say. You don't get judged for feeling. The silence after that was long. The city lights flickered through the blinds, painting shifting patterns across the floor. Finally, he said, then maybe I should step back, give you space. She looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the edge of a paperclip. Would that fix it? No, he admitted, but maybe it would hurt less. He said it gently, and somehow that made it worse. Over the next few days, they kept their distance at work, brief nods in hallways, professional smiles that didn't reach their eyes. But at night, Emma found herself missing the sound of his voice, the quiet warmth that had started to feel like a place she could breathe. And then came the email, a short one. Meet me at the pier tonight, just to talk. She shouldn't have gone. She knew that. But the night air had been too heavy, her apartment too quiet. So she went. The pier was empty except for the hum of the lake and the faint shimmer of city lights across the water. Liam was there, hands in his pockets, jacket collar turned up against the wind. He smiled when he saw her. You came. I shouldn't have. I know. He looked out over the water. I've been thinking about what you said, about how this might ruin you. She frowned. It's not about ruin, Liam. It's about identity, about everything I've spent years building suddenly belonging to a rumor. He nodded slowly. I don't want that for you. Then don't make it harder, she whispered. He turned to face her. Tell me how. Let me go, she said. The wind caught her hair, tossing it across her face. For a long time, he said nothing. The waves hit the dock with slow, deliberate rhythm. Finally, he whispered, if I let you go, does that mean I stop hoping? She looked at him, this man who had once seemed untouchable, now standing in front of her with every defense stripped away. It means we stop crossing lines. We can't uncross. He nodded, eyes dim with understanding. Then, this is goodbye. Not forever, she said, just for now. She left before he could answer. The sound of her footsteps echoed across the wooden planks, steady but fragile. That night, she sent an email to HR, a request for temporary leave. Personal reasons, no elaboration. When she shut her laptop, the city lights flickered outside her window. For the first time in months, she felt both lighter and lonelier than she could bear. She whispered into the dark, I just need to find myself again. And somewhere downtown, in an office still lit long past midnight. Liam read her message. His hands rested on the keyboard, but no reply came. Only the faint sound of rain returning against the glass, soft, relentless, and full of everything they hadn't said. The boardroom was cold, too much glass, too little air. The kind of place where silence didn't just settle, it ruled. Liam stood at the head of the table, his reflection stretched thin against the polished surface. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered beneath a pale morning sun. Inside, 12 pairs of eyes watched him like judges at the edge of patience. He'd been through hundreds of meetings here, but never one like this. Mr. Harrison, the chairman began, adjusting his cufflinks. The issue isn't your leadership record, it's perception. The word hung there, perception as if it could erase everything he'd built. Rumors spread fast, another board member added. Your relationship with Ms. Collins has raised questions. HR reports tension in the department. People are whispering about favoritism. Liam clasped his hands together, keeping his voice even. Emma resigned weeks ago. That doesn't change the optics, the chairman replied. This company's reputation is everything. Investors don't like headlines with words like affair and power imbalance in the same sentence. Liam said nothing. The hum of the city below filled the silence, faint but relentless. The chairman leaned forward. We're asking you to issue a statement, clarify the situation, make it clear that your connection to Maurif's. Collins was strictly professional. Strictly professional. The words felt like ice in his throat. He could deny it. He could smooth everything over with a single sentence and keep the empire intact, but every version of that lie carried her name. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. Too steady. What if I don't issue a statement? He asked quietly. The chairman's brow furrowed. Then the board will need to reconsider your position. There it was, the line drawn in sand. Choose the company, or choose the truth. Liam exhaled slowly. I understand. He left the room without another word. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the marble hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last. Back in his office, the world looked deceptively calm. The city was moving, breathing, living completely unaware that a man at the top of the tallest tower was unraveling. He loosened his tie, sat behind the desk that had once felt like a throne, and for the first time in years, he felt small. He opened a drawer and stared at the velvet box still inside. The ring, untouched, the same one that had been meant for that morning that went wrong in every possible way. He held it in his hand for a long while, watching the light catch on its edge. You built this world, a voice in his head whispered, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Are you really going to let it fall for her? Another voice followed, quieter but stronger. Or are you willing to lose everything if it means becoming who she saw in you? He leaned back, eyes closed. The noise inside him was louder than the city itself. Hours passed like that. Then, as the sun began to sink, he stood and called for a meeting. His assistant looked startled when he said, Get the board back in the room. They gathered again, faces wary. He didn't take his seat this time. He remained standing, one hand resting on the back of a chair, the other still holding the ring box. I've made my decision, he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm, effective immediately. I'll be stepping down as CEO. Murmurs rippled through the room. The chairman frowned. Liam, that's unnecessary. A leave of absence would suffice. The media storm will pass. Liam shook his head. No, it's not about the media. It's about integrity. If this company stands for transparency, I can't stay and hide behind a lie. Do you realize what this means? Another member asked. He smiled faintly, tired but sure. Yes. It means I stop choosing power over people. The room fell into stunned silence. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang, sharp and distant. The chairman cleared his throat. And Ms. Collins. Liam's gaze drifted to the window. She has nothing to do with this decision, but she's the reason I can finally make it. No one spoke after that. Papers rustled, chairs creaked, but no one met his eyes. When it was done, he signed the letter of resignation, left the pen on the table, and walked out. Outside, the wind had picked up. The air tasted like autumn again, cool, sharp, honest. He loosened his cuffs and stood for a moment beneath the towering glass of Harrison & Co. For the first time, the building didn't feel like his. It felt like what it was, a monument to everything he'd built while forgetting how to live. He walked, no destination, just movement. The city folded around him, lights blinking awake as dusk deepened. He passed the park where he and Emma had once argued. the cafe where they'd begun to understand each other. Each step was a reminder that his world had changed shape, and maybe, finally, so had he. Later that night, he found himself sitting by the lake, the skyline shimmering across the water. The wind tugged at his sleeves, carried the faint smell of rain. He thought of her, how she'd stood on this same shore once, saying she needed to find herself again. He whispered into the quiet, "Maybe I need to do the same." He pulled out his phone. The message sat unsent for minutes. Then he typed it slowly. "I stepped down today. Thought you should know, it's not the end of something, just the start of me doing things differently." He didn't add her name, didn't ask for a reply. He just hit send, let the phone rest beside him, and watched the city lights tremble in the dark water. The lake was still except for a single ripple that spread and softened until it disappeared. Liam leaned back on the bench, eyes half closed. The weight of the world hadn't lifted, but it finally felt like something he could carry without breaking. And somewhere out there, in a small apartment lit by lamplight and quiet music, Emma's phone buzzed. She picked it up, read the message, and for the first time in weeks, smiled not because everything was fixed, but because something had shifted. In the space between loss and becoming, something new had begun to breathe. The apartment was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that hums after rain soft, thoughtful, a little lonely. Emma sat at her small wooden desk, a single lamp casting a circle of warm light over blank paper. The city outside moved like a whisper, car tires against wet asphalt, a siren far away, the faint hum of life continuing without her. She had been staring at that page for nearly an hour. The pen rested in her hand, heavy with everything unsaid. The message from Liam had arrived that morning, 8 simple words. "I stepped down today. Thought you should know." 8 words that had followed her all day like a shadow. Now, under the glow of the lamp, she finally began to write. "Dear Liam, you once told me silence was strength, that the world respected the man who didn't flinch, who didn't feel, who kept the line straight even when it cut him open. I believed you. For years, I measured my worth by how still I could stand in your storms. But silence isn't strength, it's distance. It's the space where we hide what we're afraid to lose. When I first came to Harrison & Co., I thought I could be someone unshakable, the kind of woman who didn't cry in bathrooms or doubt her place at the table. I tried to become that woman for you, for them, for me. Somewhere in the process, I forgot what my own voice sounded like. You made me hate the mirror because I saw how much I cared. And I hated that caring made me weak. Do you know what it's like to walk through a world that rewards the quiet, the polished, the untouched, to hold your breath just to fit the frame? You taught me that power was control, but love isn't control, is it? It's surrender. It's standing in the mess and saying, "This is me, anyway." I think that's what you were trying to tell me that night in the rain. You didn't use those words, but I heard them. Somewhere between the sound of thunder and the way you looked at me without armor. When you showed up at my door, I saw the boy behind the man, the one who'd built walls high enough to scrape the sky. You spent years protecting yourself from loss. I spent years pretending I wasn't afraid of it. Maybe that's why we found each other. 2 lonely fortresses pretending we weren't waiting for someone to knock. I don't know what you expected when you told me you were stepping down. Maybe you thought it would make things easier. Maybe you just needed me to see that you could choose something different. Either way, I want you to know I see you now. The man beneath the silence. The one who tried so hard to be unbreakable, he forgot what it felt like to be alive. You said once that control was all you had left. I think I understand that now, because letting go of you feels like losing something I never fully had, but somehow still loved with everything I am. There's a version of us that exists somewhere, one where timing was kinder, where we met as equals, where fear didn't run the show. Maybe in that world, you hand me the ring, and I don't throw coffee. Maybe I say yes before you even ask. But here, in this one, I think we both needed to fall apart to find ourselves again. You told me you're starting over. I hope that's true. I hope you find peace in the quiet you used to fill with control. I hope the man who once lived behind glass learns to open windows. As for me, I'm learning to forgive the girl who stayed too long, who loved too deeply, who mistook survival for strength. I'm learning that soft doesn't mean weak, that endings can be merciful if you let them. If you ever wonder what I'd have said if I'd answered your message, this is it. I'm proud of you. I'm grateful for what we had. And I'll never regret that you were the one who taught me that, even when love doesn't last, it can still be real. Maybe one day, we'll meet again, not as boss and employee, not as two people trying to prove they can't be hurt, just as Liam and Emma, two souls who once collided so hard they both learned how to feel again. Until then, thank you for the lessons, for the pain, for the moments between words. You once said courage was control, but I think courage is this writing a letter I'll never send. She stopped writing. The lamp flickered softly, as if the light itself was tired. She read the letter once more, her eyes tracing the rhythm of her own truth. It didn't feel angry or broken, just honest. The kind of honesty that didn't need an audience. She folded the page carefully, pressing along the crease. The paper made a soft sigh, the sound of something ending gently. Then she opened the drawer of her desk, placed the letter inside, and closed it. For a moment, she just sat there, listening to the hum of the fridge, to the rain returning faintly against the glass, to her own heartbeat slowing. She whispered, almost to herself, if we're meant to find each other again, he'll know. The light from the lamp caught the corner of the drawer, just enough to make the edge gleam. And somewhere across the city, a man stood by his window, holding a phone he couldn't bring himself to call with. The night pressed soft against the glass, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he smiled. He didn't know why, only that something had shifted, something invisible, something true. A month had passed since he stepped down. The city had rolled through the tail end of winter into a pale, early spring, the kind where sunlight feels tentative like it's testing the world before it fully returns. Liam hadn't been back to the office since that day, but that morning, he stood again in front of the mirror, tying a tie he no longer needed, straightening a collar that suddenly felt unfamiliar. His reflection stared back at him, quieter somehow. The man looking back wasn't the CEO anymore, just Liam Harrison, someone trying to do the right thing, even if it came too late. Outside, the streets were damp from last night's rain. He walked instead of calling a car, needing the time to think. By the time he reached Harrison & Co., the glass tower loomed over him like a memory. Employees had gathered inside, already hundreds of them, all summoned by an unexpected notice about an all-staff meeting. The air buzzed with curiosity and rumor. When he entered the lobby, the conversation stopped. For a moment, the world held its breath. He nodded politely to the receptionist, who still looked at him as if she were seeing a ghost. The elevator ride was long, each floor chiming like a countdown. By the time the doors opened to the main hall, the room was packed. Rows of chairs filled the space, faces turned toward the stage where a simple podium waited under soft white lights. Cameras had been set up, one for internal streaming, one for the employees who worked remotely. He walked to the front, unhurried, no notes in his hands, only truth. When he reached the microphone, the murmurs died completely. He stood for a moment, eyes sweeping the crowd, familiar faces, some curious, some tense, others quietly expectant. He let the silence linger. He'd learned that sometimes. Silence spoke first. "Good morning," he began, voice calm, low. "Thank you for being here." A pause. "I know most of you didn't expect to see me again." A faint ripple of movement in the crowd. Someone coughed. The camera light blinked red, recording everything. Liam continued, "I came today because I owe this company something. Not an explanation, not even an apology, but the truth." He looked down for a moment, collecting his thoughts. You've all heard the rumors about me, about Emma Collins, about what may or may not have happened. And I think it's time I said this out loud, so there's no room left for whispers. The room grew still. The woman you gossip about is the reason this company still breathes. The words landed heavy, clear. She's the reason our campaigns found their voice, the reason our teams learned how to listen again. She reminded us that people aren't numbers, that success means nothing without humanity behind it. I was too proud to admit that while she was here. I let my silence become a weapon, and I hurt someone who deserved better. His voice caught slightly, but he kept going. When Emma left, she didn't just walk away from a job. She walked away from a world that made her feel small for being human. I built that world. I thought control was strength. Turns out, it was fear. He let out a breath, the kind that sounded like release. So, if you're waiting for me to deny it, to say there was no connection, no feeling, you won't hear that from me, because it wouldn't be true. She changed me, and not in the way the tabloids think. She taught me how to be honest, how to be kind, how to listen. He looked toward the crowd, meeting eyes one by one, and if that cost me your respect, so be it. I'd rather stand here stripped of titles than keep pretending I'm made of stone. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a sound, a single clap from the back of the room. Another followed, and then another, until the hall filled with applause that wasn't loud or dramatic, but steady, honest. Liam didn't smile. He simply bowed his head slightly, humbled. When the noise faded, he stepped back from the podium. "I'm not coming back," he said quietly. "This place belongs to all of you now. Make it better than I did. Make it kinder." He walked off stage without looking back. Outside, the wind carried the faintest trace of applause from the glass atrium above. It sounded distant, like waves against a shore he'd finally left behind. Across town, in a small apartment warmed by morning light, Emma sat curled on the couch, laptop open on her knees. She hadn't planned to watch, but the link had arrived in her inbox from an old co-worker. Subject line simple: "You need to see this." So she clicked, and there he was, Liam, standing before the company they had both built, speaking words she never thought she'd hear. The live stream was grainy, but his voice carried through clearly. Calm, steady, true. "The woman you gossip about is the reason this company still breathes." The line hit her like a tide. She pressed a hand over her mouth. The screen blurred. His words rolled through the room, through her, breaking apart whatever walls still lingered. He wasn't defending her. He was freeing her from shame, from misunderstanding, from the silence that had followed them both. When he finished, she closed the laptop slowly. The room seemed too quiet now, too still to contain the ache in her chest. Tears came, not sudden, but steady. She didn't fight them this time. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to. She whispered into the empty room, "You finally learned how to speak, Liam." Outside, the world was bright again. Sunlight spilled across the floorboards, landing on the umbrella by her door, the same one he'd left weeks ago. She smiled through her tears, tracing the handle with her fingertips. The truth had found its way into the world at last. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. In the corporate hall, long after the meeting had ended, the sound of his words lingered quiet but unshakable. And somewhere between the echo of applause and the soft hum of spring wind through the open doors, it felt like forgiveness had finally taken its first breath. The morning air carried the quiet chill of spring, the kind that still held a trace of winter in its breath. The park was almost empty, just the steady rhythm of feet against gravel, the rustle of wind through new leaves, the faint laughter of a child somewhere in the distance. Emma ran the same loop she always did 3 miles around the lake, past the benches in the fountain and the bench where she always stopped to stretch. It had become her ritual, her peace, the place where her thoughts moved slower, gentler, but that morning, something felt different. She slowed to a jog, breath misting in the cool air. Across the path, standing by the line of maple trees, someone was waiting. He wasn't supposed to be there. Liam. He stood still, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, sunlight falling through the branches above him. For a second, the world tilted like the air itself had been holding its breath since the day they said goodbye. Emma stopped running. Her heartbeat was too loud now, a steady drum in her chest. She didn't move, neither did he. They just stood there, two quiet figures caught in the stillness between everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. He looked the same, but not quite, softer around the edges, less armor, more human. The kind of tired that comes from fighting for peace instead of power. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, careful. "You come here every morning." She nodded once. "Most mornings." A pause. A small breeze stirred between them. "I didn't plan this," he said. "I just needed to see you." Emma crossed her arms, more out of habit than defense. "How did you know where to find me?" He smiled faintly. "I didn't. I remembered you mentioned this park once. Said it's the only place the city feels honest." Her lips curved, just barely. "I said that, didn't I?" He nodded. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like it used to be. It just was. A quiet presence, familiar and strange all at once. Emma looked away first, her eyes tracing the water's edge. "I saw the broadcast," she said softly. "The meeting. What you said." Liam's shoulders tensed. "I didn't know if you'd watch." "I did." He waited. She didn't look at him when she added, "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said simply. "It wasn't for them. It was for me." Emma turned to face him then. "For you." He nodded. "For the man I was trying to be, the one you saw before, I even knew he existed." The words landed like warmth breaking through cold air. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. Liam took a step closer, then stopped close enough that she could see the faint exhaustion under his eyes, the tiny crease by his mouth when he tried not to smile. "I should have said it sooner," he said quietly. "You matter more than my pride." The words hung between them, simple and raw, the kind of truth that didn't need to be explained. For a moment, Emma forgot how to breathe. She stared at him, the edges of her vision softening. Pride? The thing that had built walls between them. The thing that had finally crumbled. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper now. "You were right to walk away. I needed to lose everything to understand what I was holding too tightly." Emma shook her head slowly, her eyes shining. "You didn't have to lose everything. Liam, you just had to let go." He smiled small, real. "I'm still learning how." Something in her chest broke open, the kind of breaking that didn't hurt, it released. They stood in silence again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peace, slowly unfolding. The world moved around them, the joggers passing by, a dog barking near the path, the wind tugging gently at her hair, but inside that moment, everything else fell away. Liam hesitated, then said softly, "Do you forgive me?" She met his eyes. "It's not about forgiveness anymore." He frowned slightly. "Then what is it?" Emma smiled, the kind that reached her eyes this time. "Understanding." A bird took off from the water, scattering ripples across the lake. The sound of its wings filled the quiet. Liam took one final step toward her, and this time, she didn't move back. They didn't speak, didn't need to. He reached for her slowly, as if asking permission, and when his arms came around her, she let herself lean in. The hug wasn't grand or cinematic. It was quiet, human, trembling with everything they'd carried and everything they'd finally put down. His coat smelled faintly of rain and coffee and something warm she couldn't name. Her heartbeat slowed against his chest. He whispered near her ear, "I missed you." "I know," she said softly. "Me too." They stood there for a long time, two silhouettes framed by sunlight and the whispering trees. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke. Their eyes said enough. Emma brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "What happens now?" Liam looked out over the lake, where the water shimmered like glass. "Maybe nothing," he said. "Maybe everything." "We'll see." She nodded, a quiet acceptance settling in her chest. "We'll see." They began walking, side by side, not holding hands, not needing to, just walking slowly, easily like two people who had finally found the same rhythm. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of early spring and distant rain. Behind them, their reflections wavered in the lake water, moving closer until they blurred into one. And somewhere between the silence and the sunlight, something new began, not as a promise, not as a declaration, just as a breath shared between two people who finally understood what it meant to let go and still find their way back. It wasn't an ending. It was the kind of beginning that doesn't need words. Morning light spilled across the small kitchen, golden and soft. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, a casualty of Liam's latest attempt at breakfast. Emma stood at the counter, arms crossed, trying not to laugh as he scraped black crumbs into the sink. "You know," she said, her voice teasing, "you could just not multitask when cooking." "I wasn't multitasking," Liam replied, his tone defensive but light. "I was strategically planning our client pitch while the bread toasted." Emma arched an eyebrow. Strategic planning doesn't involve forgetting the toaster exists. He looked at her, half smiling, half defeated. Point taken. The small apartment they shared wasn't glamorous. 2 rooms, creaky floorboards, and a table that leaned slightly to one side. But it was theirs. The beginning of something new. After months of quiet rebuilding, they had started a small media consulting firm, Collins and Harrison Communications. No investors, no board, just 2 people who had finally learned to speak the same language. The first few weeks were messy. They worked from the living room, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and stacks of folders. The printer jammed daily. The Wi-Fi blinked out whenever it rained. And still, they found themselves smiling more than they had in years. One morning, Emma looked up from her laptop. "We need milk." He glanced toward the fridge, opening it with the confidence of a man certain he was right, only to find a single, nearly empty carton staring back. "You were supposed to buy some," she said. He frowned. "No, that was your turn." "My turn." Emma tilted her head, mock serious. "We agreed you'd handle groceries. I do the cooking. I thought we said the opposite." "You just think that because you like to win arguments." Liam gave her a look, half amusement, half surrender. "Fine, I'll go." "Thank you," she said, grinning as he grabbed his jacket. When he returned 20 minutes later, triumphantly holding 2 cartons, she pointed to them and said, "You bought almond milk." He blinked. "That's milk. For coffee, maybe, but not for pancakes." Liam groaned. "How many kinds of milk does one world need?" She laughed, that kind of laugh that fills a room and softens everything inside it. Later, while mixing batter. Emma caught him watching her from across the counter. His expression was thoughtful, quiet. What she asked. "Nothing," he said softly. "Just, this feels nice." She nodded. "Yeah, it does." They worked hard that afternoon, reviewing designs, editing proposals, debating over fonts and phrasing. Sometimes, their old patterns tried to resurface Liam's instinct to lead, Emma's urge to defend, but each time, one of them stopped, breathed, and listened. Once, when he raised his voice over a creative disagreement, she simply said, "You're doing it again." He paused, catching himself, then exhaled slowly. "You're right. Sorry." It was a small moment, but to her, it meant everything. That evening, after the last client call ended, they sat on the couch surrounded by notebooks and takeout containers. The TV remote sat between them like a truce flag. Emma reached for it first. Movie Liam looked skeptical. As long as it's not another sad romance where everyone learns a lesson at the end, she smirked. No promises. They spent 10 minutes scrolling through options: comedy, drama, thriller, each vetoing the other's choices. Finally, she said, "Let's just watch something random." He nodded. "Fine, but I'm holding the remote. You always hold the remote. That's because you always fall asleep halfway through. I do not." "Emma, you fell asleep during Inception. That movie was a dream about a dream." "Liam." My brain gave up. He laughed, really laughed. The kind that crinkles the corners of his eyes. She hadn't heard it in a long time. When the movie finally started, they didn't watch much. The city lights outside flickered through the blinds, painting soft stripes across the room, somewhere in the middle of a forgettable scene. Emma rested her head on his shoulder. He hesitated, then wrapped an arm around her. No grand gesture, no big declaration, just warmth, familiar, safe. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, their small company began to find its rhythm. Clients came through referrals. Reviews spread quietly. Their first real contract arrived one Tuesday morning, signed with a note from the client. "It feels like you actually listen." Emma printed the email, taped it to the wall above their desks. "Proof," she said. "We're doing something right." Liam nodded, pride soft in his eyes. "We're building again." She smiled, this time differently. He looked at her, understanding exactly what she meant. That weekend, they cooked dinner together, pasta, wine, nothing fancy. The kitchen was filled with the sound of sizzling garlic, the low hum of old jazz from the speaker, and their laughter bouncing off the walls. At one point, Emma spilled sauce on her shirt and groaned. Liam reached over with a towel, trying to help, but managed to smear it more. "See," she teased, "you're better with numbers than tomatoes." He grinned. "We can't all be perfect." "Who said I was perfect?" He looked at her, his voice quiet. "You didn't have to." For a moment, they both fell silent. The music played on. He turned down the heat, poured 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," he said. She raised hers gently. "To learning how to stay." They clinked glasses. The sound was small, but it felt like a promise. Later that night, long after the dishes were done and the city outside had gone still, Emma sat by the window with her notebook. She wrote down a line she didn't want to forget. "Sometimes the real rebuild starts not with plans, but with patience." She closed the book, turned to look at him asleep on the couch, TV still glowing faintly. She smiled, whispered, "We're getting there." The light from the window washed over both of them, soft, forgiving, steady. And in that quiet room, filled with the smell of wine and garlic and hope, it was clear what they were building. This time wasn't just a company, it was a life. The afternoon light shimmered over Lake Michigan, gentle and gold, like it had been brushed across the water by hand. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and spring grass. People walked by with coffee cups and laughter, the world humming quietly in the background. But for Emma, everything narrowed to the rhythm of her footsteps on the gravel path, the same path where, years ago, she had walked away from everything she thought she knew. Now, she was walking towards something she didn't quite understand yet. Liam had asked her to meet him there by the bench near the trees, he'd said, voice soft but deliberate. The same bench where the walls between them had cracked for the first time. She spotted him before he saw her. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, staring at the lake, no suit, no tie, just jeans, a dark sweater, and that familiar stillness he carried, only now, it wasn't cold, it felt grounded. Emma paused for a moment before walking closer, letting the crunch of gravel under her shoes announce her arrival. He turned, and the wind caught his hair just enough to make him look younger, unguarded. "You're early," she said. He smiled faintly, for once. She sat beside him, leaving just enough space for the wind to breathe between them. For a while, neither spoke. The lake moved with small, deliberate waves. Somewhere behind them, a street musician played a tune on a guitar, soft and slow a melody that seemed to belong to the very afternoon. Liam looked down at his hands, then at her. "You know," he said quietly, "the last time we were here, I didn't say what I should have." Emma tilted her head. "You said plenty." He smiled, small, knowing, not the right things. Silence again, but this time it was full, comfortable, the kind that lets two hearts remember how to listen. He took a slow breath, then stood. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the lake. She frowned playfully. "Where are we going?" Just there. He led her closer to the water, the sand soft beneath their shoes. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, glass and steel catching the light. She could hear gulls overhead, the whisper of waves against the rocks, the sound of the world holding still for something small but true. Liam stopped and turned to her, his hands in his pockets. For a moment, he looked nervous, a rare sight, almost strange on his face. "I thought about how I'd do this," he said, his voice low, steady but quiet. "If I should make it grand, or surprising, or dramatic." He smiled to himself. "But I think we've both had enough of grand gestures." Emma watched him, her heartbeat soft but heavy in her chest. "Liam." He shook his head gently, eyes meeting hers. "Let me finish." The wind picked up, carrying his words like something sacred. "I spent too long believing that love was control, that if I could manage everything, I wouldn't lose anything. But you showed me that love isn't built from power. It's built from choice, from staying, from trying again, even when you're scared." Her throat tightened. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't the same one from years ago that one had been lost, forgotten, maybe even thrown away. This one was simple, no logo, just soft fabric and the sound of his thumb brushing over it as he held it. He opened it slowly, revealing a silver ring, delicate, understated, glinting in the afternoon sun. "No power," he said softly. "No titles, no company, just us." He took a breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "Will you build a life with me this time?" Emma felt her chest rise, her breath catching on the edges of his words. The world around them blurred, the lake, the people, the city beyond. All she could see was him, standing there in the same place where once, years ago, their story had broken open. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The wind moved through her hair, cool against her skin. Finally, she smiled the kind of smile that carried every fight, every apology, every morning that had brought them here. "Liam," she whispered, voice trembling, "you don't have to build it alone." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She stepped closer, reaching for his hands, closing them around hers. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes. I will." The sound of the waves softened around them, like the world itself exhaled. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for that moment all along. When she looked up, his eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something gentler, the quiet kind of joy that doesn't need to be seen to be real. She laughed softly, her voice carried away by the wind. "You know," she said, "the first time you said those words, you were wearing a $1,000 shirt." He grinned. "And you ruined it with coffee." "Best thing I ever did," she said. He laughed, pulling her close, and she felt his heart beat steady against hers. They stood there, the world around them fading into light and sound, the wind, the waves, the faint hum of the city that had witnessed both their breaking and their becoming. He whispered against her hair, "You make everything simple." She smiled against his chest. "It's never simple, Liam." We just stopped fighting what was already true. They stayed like that until the sun began to dip low, painting the lake in shades of amber and rose. Their shadows stretched across the sand, merging slowly as the light softened. When they finally turned to leave, Emma looked back once more at the water, the bench, the city behind it all, the place where everything had started, ended, and begun again. She reached for his hand as they walked. He squeezed gently, not to hold, not to claim, just to remind. The wind brushed past them, cool and alive, carrying laughter, the scent of the lake, and the quiet promise of everything still ahead. And for the first time, the word forever didn't sound heavy, it just sounded right. The morning light drifted through the curtains, soft and golden, painting the wooden floor in stripes of warmth. Somewhere outside, a child laughed that small, bright sound that only comes from pure joy. Emma stood by the kitchen counter, the kettle humming softly beside her. She reached for 2 mugs, one blue, one white with a chip near the handle, and poured coffee the way she always did. 1 spoon of sugar for her, none for him. She smiled at the routine, the ease of it. Through the open window, she could see Liam in the yard, sleeves rolled up, repairing the fence again. The boards leaned slightly, weathered by rain and time, but he fixed them patiently, humming a tune under his breath. Clara, their daughter, darted around him like sunlight in motion, a flash of curls, laughter, and pink sneakers kicking up grass. She was 5 now, full of questions, always carrying a story in her hands. Today, she had a plastic watering can and a mission to save the flowers from being thirsty. Liam crouched to her level, listening seriously as she explained her plan. Emma couldn't hear the words, but she could tell from his smile, wide, soft, unguarded, that he was all in. The screen door creaked open, letting in the scent of cut grass and the faint echo of birds. Emma carried 2 mugs outside, one for him, one for herself. "You're supposed to be taking a break," she called. Liam looked up, squinting against the sun. "I am," he said, leaning on the fence post. "This is my break." She handed him the mug, and he took it with a grateful nod. "You're still using that chipped one," she teased. He looked at it for a moment, then smiled. "It's part of the story now." She laughed, shaking her head. "You say that about everything, because everything is part of the story," he said simply. Clara ran up to them, breathless. "Daddy, the flowers are saved." He knelt down, brushing dirt from her hands. "You're a hero," he said. She giggled. "Mommy says heroes clean up after themselves." Emma smiled. "Smart mommy." The little girl darted back toward the garden, her laughter rippling through the air. They watched her for a moment, the way she moved freely, fearlessly, as if the whole world belonged to her. Liam took a sip of his coffee. "Do you ever think," he said softly, "that this wasn't supposed to happen? That maybe we weren't meant to end up here? And somehow, we just did anyway?" Emma looked at him, her eyes calm. "Maybe that's what meant to be really is," she said. "Not something written, just something we keep choosing." He nodded, silent for a while, his gaze following the line of the fence. "You know," he said, "I used to think success was noise. Meetings, deals, applause." He looked back at her, his voice quieter now. "Turns out it's this, the sound of her laugh, the way you pour coffee, the quiet." Emma smiled, her chest warm. "You finally like quiet," he grinned, "only with you in it." The wind picked up, brushing through the trees, carrying the faint chime of wind bells near the porch. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The world felt beautifully ordinary. Emma leaned against the post beside him, her shoulder touching his. They stayed that way for a while, not talking, just breathing together, inside the house. The clock ticked steadily, marking another small, perfect morning. Later that afternoon, clouds gathered, the kind that promised rain, but not enough to worry about. Clara sat cross-legged on the porch, coloring. Her crayons were everywhere. Liam was fixing the screen door this time, pretending not to notice her drawing on the wood planks. "Daddy," she said suddenly, not looking up, "when I grow up, can I have a company like you and Mommy?" He smiled. "Sure you can." "What kind of company?" "A company that helps people talk nicer to each other." Liam paused, looking at her, the simple wisdom of a 5-year-old cutting straight through the noise of adulthood. "That's the best kind," he said quietly. Emma, watching from the doorway, caught his eye. For a moment, their gaze held, and in it was every version of them that had ever existed. The two people who had once hurt each other, healed each other, and learned to stay. When the rain finally came, it was soft and playful. Clara squealed and ran out into it, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched. Liam started to call her back, but Emma stopped him with a smile. "Let her," she said. "She's learning joy." He watched their daughter dance under the rain, and something inside him eased a kind of peace he hadn't known he was still searching for. Emma stepped out too, barefoot now, feeling the cool drops on her skin. She tilted her face upward, eyes closed, smiling. Liam laughed, shaking his head. "You're both crazy?" "Probably," she said, "but happy." He joined them then, the three of them standing in the drizzle, the air smelling of rain and grass and coffee still warm on the porch. Clara's laughter rang out again, bright against the gray sky. As evening settled, they sat on the porch steps wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset fade behind the trees. Clara had fallen asleep inside, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. Liam leaned his head against Emma's shoulder. "You ever think about Chicago?" She smiled faintly. "Sometimes, mostly when I make coffee." He chuckled. "You ever miss it?" "Not the city," she said. "Just who we used to be there. It's like remembering a storm loud, messy, but necessary." He nodded, understanding. They watched as the sky shifted from gold to violet, the first stars appearing faintly above the rooftops. After a while, Emma spoke softly. "You know, happiness didn't come crashing in. It crept up quietly, with morning light and laughter down the hall." Liam smiled, eyes still on the horizon. "Yeah, and I think that's the best kind." The crickets began their song. The porch light flickered on. The world was small, safe, and enough. Emma reached for his hand. He turned his palm upward, fingers fitting around hers like they'd been there all along. Neither of them said another word, because in that moment, everything that mattered was already here, the hum of life in the distance, the warmth of love beside them, and the quiet joy of knowing they had finally built something that would last. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Emma stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor, the same sound that once used to echo her anxiety. 10 years had passed, but the air of the building still carried that faint mixture of coffee and ambition. The morning light streamed through the glass facade, reflecting off the same skyline she had once stared at through tears. Only now, her reflection in the window looked different, calm, certain, touched with the quiet confidence that comes from surviving yourself. The nameplate by the door no longer read Harrison & Co. It now said Harrison & Collins Consulting. Same initials, different story. She smiled at that. Inside, the office was bright and warm, soft wood tones replacing the sterile glass. Fresh plants lining the walls. Someone had opened the windows slightly, and the sound of the city drifted in the horns. Footsteps, the pulse of life that never really stopped. Liam's voice carried from the far end of the room. "Hey, you're early." She turned to find him walking toward her, sleeves rolled up, a coffee mug in his hand. The same hands that once gripped control like a shield now carried warmth easily. Naturally. "I wanted to see it before everyone else got here," she said. "You know, the space." He nodded. "Still feels strange, doesn't it?" She glanced around, a little, but in a good way. He handed her the mug, her favorite one, chipped near the rim. "Thought you might want this." She took it, the steam curling between them. "You kept it all these years." "Of course," he said with a faint grin. "It's company history now." She laughed softly. "You're impossible." They stood side by the window, looking down at the city that had witnessed their entire story. The mistakes, The pride, the fall, and the rebuilding. From up here, it looked peaceful, almost kind. The office buzzed faintly behind them as early employees arrived, voices greeting, keyboards starting, the hum of a place alive with purpose. Emma listened, feeling something stir inside her gratitude. Maybe, or the quiet wonder of realizing she'd come full circle. She thought back to that morning, long ago, the cold coffee in her hand, the resignation letter trembling between her fingers, the sound of her own heart whispering enough. How strange, she thought, that sometimes endings only reveal themselves as beginnings years later. She placed her coffee on the ledge and traced her fingers lightly across the window glass, the same spot where she once stood trembling in anger. The faint warmth of sunlight touched her skin. Liam's reflection appeared beside hers. "Penny, for your thoughts." She smiled, just remembering the girl who stood here once, the one who thought she was walking away forever. He watched her quietly. Maybe she needed to walk away so she could find her way back differently. Emma turned to face him. His eyes, still steady and kind, held that same light that had unnerved her years ago, only now. It no longer felt like pressure. It felt like home. "You ever think," she said softly, "how one small thing can change everything? Like a cup of coffee?" He chuckled. "You mean the one that nearly ended my career?" She laughed, shaking her head. "No, the one that started everything real." He leaned against the window beside her. "You know, I kept that shirt. You didn't?" "I did. Somewhere in the attic." She smiled, eyes soft. "Why?" He shrugged. "Reminds me that love's never tidy. It spills. It stains. But maybe that's how you know it's real." Her heart caught at that. The truth in it. The gentleness. They fell quiet again, watching as the city stretched itself awake, sunlight glinting off car roofs. The lake in the distance rippling under the wind. Liam broke the silence first. "Clara's going to want to come here after school, you know?" Emma smiled. "I know. She'll probably try to manage everyone by 5 o'clock. He laughed. "She gets that from you. She gets her stubbornness from you." "Fair enough." For a while, neither of them said anything more. The air in the room felt light, full of memory, but not heavy with it. The kind of peace that comes when you finally make peace with your past. Emma walked over to her new desk, not large, not grand, but hers. There was a small vase of fresh flowers, a note from the team, and a framed photo of the three of them on the porch at home. Clara's smile lit up the frame, wide and free. She sat down slowly, fingertips brushing the wood surface, grounding herself in the moment. Liam stood by the door now, watching her. "You ready for the next chapter?" She looked up at him and smiled. "Always." He nodded, that small, knowing smile that had once infuriated her, but now only warmed her. "I'll be in the conference room when you're done, revisiting ghosts." She laughed softly. "Go? I'll catch up." When he left, the room fell into a stillness she welcomed. Emma leaned back in the chair, closed her eyes, and let the quiet wrap around her like a familiar song. The hum of the air vent, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint, distant city sounds below. It was the same office, and yet not at all. She opened her eyes and whispered, half to herself, half to the space that once held so much of her pain, "Thank you." Just that. No bitterness, no regret. The light shifted across the floor, slow and golden. The sound of laughter floated faintly from the hallway. She picked up her mug again, the aroma of coffee rising like memory and promise at once. And as she took that first sip, warm, strong, steady, a small smile touched her lips. Because she finally understood. Sometimes, what feels like the end is just love spilling over like coffee on a white shirt, marking the start of something real. The world outside shimmered. The day moved forward. And Emma Collins, once broken, now whole, took a quiet breath, ready for whatever would come next. Because courage, she knew now, isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to walk away. Life rarely changes in grand, sudden moments. More often, it unfolds quietly through patience, forgiveness, and the courage to stay when walking away seems easier. Emma and Liam's story reminds us that love is not about perfection or control. It's about growth, humility, and learning to see beyond our fears. True strength lies not in pride or power, but in gentleness, in choosing to rebuild what was once broken. For many of us, time teaches that happiness doesn't arrive with noise or applause. It comes softly in shared laughter, in ordinary mornings, in the comfort of being understood. The spilled coffee that once symbolized anger became, in the end, a mark of new beginnings. Life is much the same. What feels like an ending may be the start of something truer. So, as we grow older, perhaps the lesson is simple: to forgive more easily, to hold others with kindness, and to trust that even our mistakes can lead us home. Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to keep loving, one imperfect day at a time. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. Your time and presence mean more than words can say. If this journey touched your heart or made you reflect on your own life, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about love, healing, and second chances. Your support helps us keep creating meaningful content from our heart to yours.